And this video is going to focus a little bit on the key members of Congress. So it's important to note a couple things. With the 119th Congress beginning in January of 2025, the Republican Party is going to have the advantage of both the House and the Senate, which is important as we go over a couple of these leadership positions. So the parties pick their own leaders from the elected members of Congress. So, for example, the Speaker of the House is the leader of the House of Representatives and is always elected from the majority party, right? So this year, that'll be a continuation. Person's name is Mike Johnson, who is a Republican, and he will be continue to be the House of Speaker of the House. The Republicans have had the advantage in the House for a little bit now. This year coming up is no different, so they'll continue to have the Speaker of the House. That guy's name is Mike Johnson. He's important because he kind of runs the House of Representatives on a day-to-day basis, but he's also in charge of the Republicans in the House of Reps, and he'll largely be responsible for assigning each of the Republicans in the House of Reps to the various committees, which the Republicans will have an advantage on every single one of them. The House Minority Leader, who is the leader of the minority party, which now is, again, continuing to be the Democrats in the House. There's fewer Democrats than Republicans. That's Hakeem Jeffries, who's a representative from New York, right? So he'll be the person that is like the largest, most outspoken critic of President Trump and the Republicans from the House of Representatives. He's kind of like the leader of the Democrats in the House, right, which is the minority party at the moment. And he'll be responsible for assigning the various Democrats to their individual committees. In the Senate, these are the Senate leaders. So the actual president of the Senate is the Vice President of the United States, right, who will be J.D. Vance, Trump's vice president. But the vice president's got a lot of other stuff that he's doing. So even though the Constitution says he's the president of the Senate, he's barely ever in the Senate, right? In fact, the only time that the vice president will show up in the Senate is to cast a tie-breaking vote. So, you have 100 senators. It could be 50-50. It won't be because now the Republicans have a 53-47 advantage. But it still could possibly be a tie. Vance would come in and cast a deciding vote. But because the vice president, who is the true president of the Senate, is rarely there, the majority party has to pick what's called a president pro tempore, who it kind of stands for like temporary president of the Senate in Latin. And this historically goes to the longest serving member of the majority party, who's been in the Senate the longest from the majority party, which again, this time it's going to be the Republicans have control about the House and the Senate. So it's a guy named Chuck Grassley, who is a senator from Iowa. He was first elected in the early 1980s. At the time that this video is being made at the end of December, it hasn't really been decided who the president pro tempore is going to be for the new Senate that's taking over in January of 2025. It would normally be Grassley because he's the longest serving member of the majority party. He's been there since the early 1980s, but he's also really old. He's 91. So there's a chance that he might just like pass it up. But if he doesn't, or they decide to give it to somebody else, like we'll have to talk about it at that point. But the longest serving member of the majority party is Grassley. So it's a largely ceremonial position, but is responsible for running some day-to-day stuff, right, of like the Senate, kind of like filling in for the vice president when he's not there, which is almost always. And then the majority leader is the true sort of leader of the majority party, which again is the Republicans. It's a guy named John Thune from South Dakota. He's responsible for placing all of the Republicans on the various committee assignments. He's also kind of like the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. And the minority leader of the United States Senate, a guy named Chuck Schumer, who is a longtime senator from New York. He's kind of the leader of the Democrats, responsible for appointing all the Democrats in the Senate to their various committees. Schumer was the majority leader in the 118th, right, Congress, because the Democrats had the advantage, right? So he was the majority leader. But then based on the elections in November 2024, the Republicans took advantage in the Senate. They're now the most numerous party. So Schumer goes to now be the minority party, right, leader. So again, these are your key leaders in the United States Congress as we go into January 2025. And I should mention real quick that just we'll talk about this again later in the year, but this is the order of presidential succession. So this is just the order of who takes over for who in the case of an emergency. So obviously, if something happens to President Trump, Vice President Vance takes over. But if something happens to President Trump and Vice President Vance, then Mike Johnson would become the new president because he's next in line as the Speaker of the House, right? And then if something happened to Trump, Vance, and Johnson, it would be Grassley, whom is the president pro tempore of the Senate, unless the Republicans decide to appoint somebody else as the temporary leader of the Senate, right? So again, not only are they party leaders, but they're also in order of presidential succession as well.